Hello everybody, welcome to our next episode of Two Airheads and a Boxer.
Evander Hollyfield couldn't be with us, couldn't hear the phone ring, so we're using this as a boxer.
Get it? Because you have the phone ring. Anyway, yes, welcome to another episode. I think this is probably episode 3, I think. Today we're finally going to get into some deep teardown stuff. A lot of the stuff before this was the things we had to get here, removing the fenders, getting out all the liquids and stuff. So now we're ready to actually start tearing down some stuff. So Charles, why don't you tell everybody what we're going to do?
Well, today what we're going to focus on is taking the front end off. We're going to get all the wiring out of here. One of the things we're doing the race bike cafe racer build, we're going to clean up all the wiring, eliminate a lot of the stuff we don't need. We're not going to need turn signals. We're going to keep wiring for a headlight and a tail light and a brake light, just in case we want to put it on the road. But we're going to streamline the wiring harness, get rid of a lot of stuff, move to some more modern electrical circuits. And basically bring it up to spec without all the wiring. We'll show you later. But
yeah.
There's a rat's nest of wiring behind the headlight on this. We're going to eliminate all of that. That's what we're going to focus on today: is getting the whole front end off and cleaning up some of the wiring in the front.
All right, great. Yeah. So as anybody who has boxers knows, your headlight bucket, and yeah, we'll bring the camera around later and show you what it is. But all the wiring is basically run through your headlight bucket. It's if
relays,
you know
the
how to
fuses,
do right,
everything.
the relays, the fuses, everything is run through the bucket. So if you know how to do electrical, you're not intimidated by it. But if you don't really know much about electrical, you take your headlight off and you're like, holy crap, what the hell's going on in here? It is always described as a rat nest. So we're going to take all that out. We'll obviously have to take off the bars and the speedo. We're going to take the full front end. We have ordered a replacement front end basically because we want to go to dual disc in the front.
Correct. We want to build this to the R90S spec.
Right.
Which has the dual discs, the dual ATE calipers. So we're going to have to eventually replace the master cylinder right here, which they conveniently hide underneath the tank, and go with some braided steel brake lines. Really get the brakes up to snuff to put it on the track.
Right, because again, the plan is to maybe take us out racing. If you want to do that, brakes are obviously very important.
Very important.
When you're racing. As anybody knows, the front brakes on these old Boxers they're not that great anyway. They're single disc. And they don't have a lot of bite. They're just awful brakes. One of the first things a lot of people do is upgrade the brakes on these things because they're bad. So we have ordered an R90S front end. This is a regular R90. The R90S is the one that came with the dual disc brakes on both sides. So we're going to get rid of this front end, put on a new R90S front end so we can put dual brakes on there. So in order to do that, obviously we got to take the whole front end off. So when those get here and we put it back together, we can do that. So we're going to get started on taking off the front end here today. Thanks for joining for this episode, and let's get started on the front end.
Let's do it.
All right, great. All right, so the first thing we got to do, obviously, is you got to get the handlebars off the bike. So Charles, why don't you kind of walk me through a little bit what is required
All right.
to take off handlebars
Well,
on a
for starters, you got
Boxer.
to get rid of you got to loosen all this. We've already loosened these. A couple of 4mm Allen bolts right there. It loosens them up, allows them to slide. We've removed our grips, which I think someone used some Gorilla Glue to put them on because it took about 30 minutes just to get those off.
Right.
But as you see, the wiring won't let you pull it all the way off. So we've got to actually remove the bars, slide everything off, get the controls off.
So again, for the novices, remember we're making these videos for 2 people. The back side of each grip has one of these little bolts. And what it does is it basically expands the grip, it loosens it up, so then you can slide it off and off. It's not like a lot of other bikes where the grips completely break apart in half and then they fall off. These basically stay together. They just tighten and loosen on there. So you got to get those loose so you can remove the grips.
Once we get those off, there's a series of bolts underneath the top triple clamp, which hold your handlebar clamps on. Got to get those off. There's a couple of 13mm and 10mm that have to come off first. These are the 10mm usually go right in here. We've already done a little bit of prep work and removed them.
Yeah, we don't want to waste your time showing a bunch of unscrewing, but there's a 10mm bolt that goes right here that holds on these are the clamps up here at the top.
And
it also holds on the speedometer. And then you've got 13-inch millimeters.
And on the back.
Right.
And then we'll be able to pull off the handlebars and start actually taking the fork caps or forks down.
All right.
So
let's do it.
Let's go ahead and get that. Where's my 13 now? There it is. And this is really tight in here because there's not much room.
Yeah, I've replaced handlebars several times on my other R75/6, and it is very difficult to reach these. You can't generally use a regular socket. You have to get in there with a wrench and the little girly hands again.
this side.
All right, and again, there are two on each side. We just pre-took one out, so we didn't have to waste everybody's time showing it. So once you get those two clamps off, the bars obviously just fall right off.
Just to keep all of our hardware together, I like to put stuff like this back together. That way we know where it is. Now we can shift the bars over to one side, pull the throttle off, and pull the clutch lever off.
And you can see this bar is not in great shape. Obviously, we're probably not going to reuse it. If it's going to be a race bike, we're going to put some clip-ons on there or some cafe racer style bars so it can go on the track. But that's what the chrome will do after sitting for several years. Yeah. We don't edit here, folks. We just do it raw. All right, so now what?
Now we're going to start start working through the wiring, getting this stuff out. Probably need to remove this.
Yeah.
Does that got a nut on the back? It does. 10 millimeter, I think.
And this is obviously the voltage.
Leave 10 millimeter over here.
Probably, because we use it to take the other one off. It's in your hand, or you got a different
13.
one? I'll be editing all this crap.
Yep. Oh, put it back over here. Sit it down over here.
Oh, isn't this like the standard most frustrating thing when you're building something is you lay a tool down and you're like, where the heck did I put it? I know I put it right here. It's got to be around somewhere.
I spend more time looking for the tool that I
We're
just
gonna-
had in my hand.
Yep, everybody does. All right, we're going to look and find our 10 millimeter and we'll be back.
After a 30-minute search, we finally found the 10 millimeter ratchet wrench.
Do you want to tell them where you found it?
In my back pocket.
There you go.
The entire time we searched the house, we searched everywhere we'd been,
And, it was in
and
the
that's
back
just
pocket.
how it goes.
Right. So that's a 10 millimeter at the socket at the bottom and a screw at the top. I've said it before and I'll say it again. We are not professionals completely. So we're doing this for fun. In my garage, no special jacks, no special lifts, just seeing if two guys can do something like this. So you're gonna see a lot of comedy and little things going. However, I can guarantee you there are professional mechanics that charge $300 an hour that forget that they put their wrench in their pocket. I'm not really worried about it. All right, so then we're gonna take the headlight off.
We're going to loosen the headlight bucket.
Yes.
Now most of the wiring's gonna go. Here's that rat's nest we were talking about earlier,
Yep.
and it is. If you look, you move all the wiring out of the way. There's your fuses. So if your headlight stops working in the middle of the night, you got to take the headlight out with no light, and then get in there to the fuses to see where your fuse went.
Yeah.
Bunch of relays. Basically, this is the wiring harness for a BMW, and then it just goes out to where you need to.
Like I said, anybody who knows anything about these knows about that issue. For any of you who are thinking about getting one of these, just be aware that that is where all your wiring goes into the rat's nest.
Let's see what size. That is a 25, 27 millimeter.
27
Remove the
millimeter.
ignition. There's a big nut on the ignition that holds your ignition on. Because they always put the ignition right here on the side. Helps hold the headlight in.
It's an older design. As you know, most bikes now have them up here in the middle because if you put your keys on there, they'd rattle around and scratch your paint and stuff, so they kind of switched it. But a lot of the old school guys still like it down there on the side like that.
to get them to go into place. So we're also, two of the things we need to remove off of the instrument cluster, the speedo and the tack cables. They're usually held on by a little bit of force so they don't fall off. Now the only thing holding that in is the wiring. So we've got this stripped down so that nothing is attached to the forks. We can actually start removing the forks now. And once we get that out, we'll be able to fish stuff around and move wiring to get the wiring harness minimized. So.
All right, sounds good.
Cut real quick. Before we pull the forks off, we're going to pull the front wheel off. That way it's a little easier to wield and they actually can come off individually instead of having to bring them off as a complete set and worry about ground clearance. So the wheel on these things is really easy to remove. You got a nut on this side.
What size is it?
7/8 inch is what we're using. I believe it's a 22 millimeter.
All right. Stupid Americans.
Two pinch bolts underneath. Which are 6 millimeter. And the wheel comes off just like that. You got a spacer on this side you got to be careful of.
It's on the other side.
Was it on the other side? Yeah, it was.
I think it was over here where the brakes are. And Bob's your uncle, front wheel.
The ever-growing pile.
Yes.
I do believe that we mentioned in the first episode we are in Florida. It is May now. 355 days of April during the quarantine, but it is now May. The humidity is out and it's starting to get a little warm.
Yep.
So we're sweating a little bit. So before we pull the forks off, we also want to pull the brake caliper off. Which means you want to pull these brake hoses. Now we know this brake master cylinder is empty because there's nothing in it.
Right.
It sat for so long. So we got to break these connections for the brake line and bring them out. So let's get the tools together for that and we'll be right back. Okay, so we need to break off the brake lines free in order to remove the caliper. It looks like we actually have some fluid down in the lines, but not a lot, so we should be good to go. BMW does this very much like modern cars, where you have a soft line going to a hard line. So soft line is replaceable, and this is why we put cardboard down, and then.
That's a 11 millimeter.
11 millimeter.
We could take all the guesswork out of it for you guys.
Remember, brake fluid will eat paint, so you don't want to get it on paint anywhere. Then you want to pull the caliper, which is novel design by BMW. Single pin right here. on the bottom, 19 millimeter. Okay, we're gonna have to cut.
All right, now we've got the caliper off. As you can see, just to let everyone know, once you take this big bolt off underneath here to remove the caliper, there is a pin in there, and you have to use
M8 by 125.
an M8 by a 125 bolt to get up in there and kind of unscrew that and pull it out the bottom. Once that pin pulls out the bottom, the whole caliper comes off the side, and there it is, you see, sitting over there. So just, that's one little surprise that you'll get is underneath that bolt, there's another thing that you have to remove. So once that, we got the caliper off, what's next?
Next we need to take the fork brace off so we can remove the forks individually. 13 millimeter nut on the back, 6 millimeter Allen on the front. That also holds on your reflectors, so they're going to fall off when you remove this. What this fork brace is designed to do is to minimize flex, because the BMWs, the air-cooled BMWs use a very thin axle compared to modern standards, and it can allow the forks to work slightly independently of each other. This brace helps hold them together and keep them operating, sliding up and down together in sync instead of one. Instead of doing this a little bit, it keeps them going like this. This is also the bracket that holds on your front brake where your hard line meets your soft line. It's going to come off too. So we're going to set that aside. And now we're ready to go back to the top of the forks and start removing the forks individually. Okay, we're back at the front forks, back at the top. So BMW puts these decorative caps. They also kind of hold some stuff together. But sometimes they're locked in, sometimes they're rather easy. These are actually really easy to get off, but I'll show you a trick for when they're stuck. Take a pair of needle nose pliers, work the needle nose pliers in, another pair of pliers, and it'll break them loose. BMW actually does make a tool for these. There are many tutorials online of how to make a specific tool for them, but this has worked for me several times in the past. And we've pre-loosened these just to show you. There's a plastic sleeve under there. That's kind of what helps lock them down, keeps them from vibrating loose. Next, 36 millimeter nuts on the top. Now BMW makes a special 36 millimeter socket that is, or not BMW, but several people make a special 36 millimeter socket that is shaved smooth on the face because this is a very thin nut. I've tested this one. We should be able to get it off with this. But it's 36 millimeters. And it rotates off just like that. And there is your fork spring. It is that easy to replace the fork springs on a BMW. So we're going to screw that in just a couple of threads just to hold it there. Next, we're going to loosen the clamping nut on the lower triple tree. 8 millimeter Allen wrench right here. I like to remove them just because that way I know that there's nothing holding it on. And now, depending on how long your bike has been sitting, things can get a little sticky and stuck. May need a rubber mallet to knock them out. We're gonna get these loose and we'll be right back. Okay, we got this side out. I'm gonna go back and show you how we did it on the other side. So we had to take the top nut off, which is also 36 millimeter. Same thing we used for the top fork nut.
All right, so all three of these top nuts are the same 36 millimeter
Yep.
socket.
Pull the entire top triple clamp off. Just like that. Now, you'll have wiring for your turn signals right here. We've already cut the wiring. So you rotate this, you pull that wiring through. All the rubber bushings. And your turn signal mount all come off like that. And that's also your headlight mount. So the headlight was mounted just like this on those ears. Took that off. So we're going to loosen the lock nut on that side. And again, I like to remove them just to make sure there's no friction or anything holding it in. And with a flathead screwdriver, you want to apply just a little bit of spread.
Yeah.
You don't need to gouge it. You just need to
A little bit of separation.
just a little bit of separation right there.
Ideally, we were hoping to just slide them out by hand, but it's a little bit tighter even with the bolt out, so you got to get a little bit of separation in there.
And you've got to loosen the top of your fork gator, which is, there's actually a locating pin on these fork gators to keep them from rotating. You loosen it, and then out everything comes, just like that. And there's your fork. Now, because of the way BMW did the forks, this nut holds your springs in, but if I were to flip it over, all the fork oil would come right out. So you want to put your fork cap back on and in, keep it from leaking oil all over the place. Just hand tight for now is all we need. And now we have a pair of forks.
There you go.
A pair of forks off of the BMW R90 Plus 6.